Hello and welcome to Gay Game Pressing. My name is Stefan and I'm joined today by Manu and Matt Ford. Not as usual actually, I'm hosting. Manu's not hosting because Manu is in a hotel in Berlin somewhere promising us his internet is good. His internet speed's good, but we can't quite rely on it just yet. So Manu's playing the role of the kind of roving reporter this weekend alongside Matt. I'm sitting comfortable in my house, potentially with a cold on the way, so I'm taking a back seat this weekend. I'll host the show, I'll ask the questions, I'll put my feet up, and I'll let you guys who've been doing the hard yards this weekend do most of the heavy lifting. But Manu, I'll start with you. How's Berlin? How are Union? How's the German capital? Is it still standing?
It's still standing.
Although from a Bavarian point of view, you might say it never stood in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, it was divided for a while. No, Berlin is great. I'm staying at Alexanderplatz in the heartland of East Germany. I just had a wonderful meal after the NFL Germany game, which was entertaining. The meal was better. I'm ready to talk about Union Berlin, the crazy game there. Very attractive game, and I'm ready to go home. It's 10:20, Stefan. I have my first flight at 6 o'clock in the morning out of Berlin Airport, which I can report is finally finished. So good news on that front.
Yeah, the new airport's pretty nice. It's got this lovely kind of wood paneling inside. I think it's actually a really nice airport.
Took 55 years to build, so it better be nice.
Yeah, I suppose so. Do you know, I was chatting to my wife today about your globetrotting, and as I said to you this afternoon, I was like, I don't know how you have the energy for it. But then as we were driving, we realised, well, hold on a minute. He's a new father who routinely gets to hop on a flight for 12 hours and do absolutely nothing except sleep and whatever he wants to do. And my wife was like, I would take that. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I would take that. We were both saying how we would happily do the 12-hour flight, get off the plane, grab some snacks, and then get back on for another 12 hours because like that kind of free time is just completely lost.
Supposed to be a secret.
Sorry. In case your wife's listening, we'll say you're actually working very, very hard and it's torture to be away from home, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, on that note, we'll swiftly move on. Matt, how are you doing, bud?
Yeah, all good, thanks. Listening to all the stories of Manu's flights back and forth across the Atlantic, it sounds like it's easier to get from Canada to Berlin than it is to get from Cologne to Gladbach, to be honest. I think we've mentioned before, it really is, without a doubt, the most difficult Bundesliga stadium to get to. And I've been going there for over 10 years, and I still can't work out the best way in and out. I've tried the bus, or from the station. I've tried the trains. I've tried getting like a van with friends before. I've tried getting a train, then a bike or an e-scooter. This time I drove. And yeah, what one route was like through various farms and countryside. The other route almost took me back via Dusseldorf. It's not far. It's only about 44 kilometers, but it's the most difficult place to get to. So yeah, I would take a 12-hour flight any day of the week over trying to get to Mönchengladbach and back.
I have on occasion had colleagues and friends in Glasgow ask about Gladbach because they've played both Celtic and Rangers in recent years. And
yeah, they have, yeah.
I've had people say to me, oh, we're just staying in Cologne and we'll be fine getting to the game. And I was like, you will not be fine getting to the game. You have to really do your homework getting there. I think my advice, the best way to get to Gladbach is to probably fly to the Netherlands and then drive from there. I think that's probably quicker than trying to get from Cologne, to be honest with you. So
that might genuinely be an option. Yeah, there are people around Cologne who refer to Gladbach as East Holland. So yeah. It is that close. Maybe that's an option. I'll try that next time.
Truly scathing insult.
Fly from Cologne to the Netherlands, and then
come back.
Trying to the logistics sound. It's probably worth a try.
Yeah. Anyway, we have to crack on with the football here. This is not a travel show as much as it probably sounds like it these days. Guys, we have asked our subscribers on Substack for some questions. We had a lot of fun doing it, Manu and I, last week. it seems like a kind of fun way of kind of rounding up the match day. If you're listening to this on the podcast or listening to it on YouTube, you guys can join in if you go and subscribe to us on Substack. We opened it up to our free subscribers too. It's not just a paid thing or anything like that. So we're not sure how often we'll do it. It might be sporadically, but we send out an email and then you can obviously ask questions when we do. And we got a bunch of questions. Now, I got to say, there's 2 or 3 which kind of bled into what we talked about last week. So, if there's some questions on Leverkusen or St. Pauli, I think Manu and I did a decent job of covering that last weekend. I know St. Pauli lost this weekend, so it's a fair question to ask about, whether Blessing's keeping his job. But I think we'll put that one on ice for now. We've got a long international week. There'll be plenty to talk about. Not to mention a certain someone near a certain Volkswagen factory losing his job. But we'll touch all that in midweek with a bit more detail. But anyway, first question from Gotham asks, are Dortmund in trouble? Is it a coaching problem or just poor personnel? How can they improve their offense? We talked last week about boring Dortmund. Was it last week? I think it was last week, wasn't it? And then Manu, we also did the midweek show on them getting absolutely spanked off Manchester City. Having just watched Manchester City demolish Liverpool, I think that makes Dortmund look a little bit better, because I'd say Dortmund put a better fight up than Liverpool did, and God knows how much money Liverpool spent in the summer. But I'll come to you first, Manu. You might not have had a chance to watch this game, obviously, because you've been in Berlin doing a lot of media work and stuff. But yeah, it's been it's kind of, it feels like this result was a long time coming. We kind of praised Dortmund for having a good start to the season. They look very professional, but it's now been quite a while now that we've been kind of complaining about the lack of imagination from Kovac, his maybe over-reliance on Guirassy, which hasn't really worked out. And, against the Haas Falside, who are obviously desperate for any sort of points, they came up short, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. I did watch this game on, I was sitting next to Dan Whiten, friend of the show from AFP, and the professional he is, he always has a second screen with him where he runs the conference, which I know means no one else has internet, but that's a different story. But so I had an eye on that, and then of course, a lot of people were quite happy with how they did. The neutrals were quite happy on how things were progressing, because Bayern Munich were set to lose points, and of course Dortmund would have maybe come a little bit closer in the standings. And then, of course, Königsdorfer scores a very late equalizer, a 90-plus second minute. Great story for him, because he was on the verge of leaving the club in the summer, right? Ended up staying because he failed the medical at Nice, I think it was.
Yeah.
And
he
so,
also hadn't scored this season until then.
Yeah, on top of that. So, but it is, we praised Dortmund for how defensively solid they have been, and how boring the football was. We criticized that, or we actually said that is a marker for Kovac football, and it will get you results more often than not. You can't ride your luck forever on just winning games 1-0. I think this is what caught up to them in this moment. All it takes sometimes is a late lucky punch equalizer, and I think that's what happened here. Are they in trouble? I wouldn't go that far. I mean, the Man City game it's kind of stands on its own. This game was very frustrating. I know Nico Schlotterbeck had some candid words. He's actually here in Berlin as well. He was at the NFL game, so briefly saw him. But he had some candid words about the match and the lack of creativity. We had that issue, of course, in the past with Mats Hummels and Edin Terzic, right? So that makes, I think, a few alarm bells ring. But we mentioned it, the creativity in the attack is struggling, and I think that's because there's players up front who just are not in form. And until that changes, I think Kovac is going to be very limited of what he can get out of the side.
Yeah, Matt, we talked about it last week in terms of maybe, in fact, no, it wasn't last week. I think it was the bonus show we did after the Man City game, and we talked about how Kovac really seems to be struggling with options right now. And considering his obviously intentions with the club and his ambitions, and the fact that as Man and I both agreed, he's probably done a good job of getting the most out of this team, considering who he replaced and the improvements he's made there. You look at the fact that he's kind of turned to some backups in this game. Emre Can, who I thought was at fault for the goal, personally. Joe Bellingham kind of came into the team, who I didn't think played particularly well. Fabian Gross as well in the middle of the park. Okay, Chukwuemeka comes in, scores a great goal. I think he's looked quite bright when he's came on as a substitute in matches, but he's obviously sticking with guys like Girassi, Maximilian Bayer, even like Svensson and Rierson, who I think both look really tired in recent weeks. He's sticking with these guys because he doesn't really have any options, isn't he, Matt? That feels to me like the fundamental issue here.
I think one issue is certainly starting lineups. If there has been a pattern in recent games, it's been Dortmund being better in second halves of games. Obviously Bayern Munich away and even Manchester City away spring to mind. Although you can argue in the second case that City sort of maybe took the foot off the gas a little bit in the second half, which allowed Dortmund to generate a bit more of at least an impression of improvement. I thought the changes that he made to the starting 11 for Hamburg on Saturday, I don't think they worked. Okay, in terms of Chukwuemeka gets the goal, okay, I'll accept that one. Although I've not been convinced with him throughout the rest of the season either. On the other hand, starting Gross and Bellingham as that midfield two, I think that was I'm guessing it's the first time that particular pairing has started together, I would guess, although may need to be corrected there. Don't think it worked particularly well. I feel like he's playing particularly Pascal Gross in all sorts of positions. He was good in the second half away at Bayern in a more advanced role, but then sometimes he's being played in a more defensive role, protecting the back four. So that all seems a bit unclear. So I feel like that's an issue for them. Lack of form, you mentioned. Adeyemi would be the one to highlight there in particular. Had a really good sort of start to the season and into September, but the past month he's definitely dropped off a little bit. I think I'm right in saying that the Chukwuemeka goal against Hamburg was their only shot on target. Dortmund, think that's correct. So that that's absolutely not a good look against a promoted team. You mentioned. Yeah, two wing-backs, Rice and Svensson. I've been really, really impressed with the two of them throughout the entire season. Whether it's tiredness sneaking in, I don't know. I think that's an issue that we can get onto, given the amount of games, particularly away games, that they've had. But, you mentioned you think that Emre Can was maybe at fault for the marking in the middle for the header. Yeah, I think another issue is a decision made by Ryerson, I think it's on the right, when he failed to block the cross. It's a good run from Dompe to sort of fake an overlap before Muheim crosses it in. But that overlap, he absolutely does Ryerson, because Ryerson goes to him, and it's that late in the game that all he can do is hang out a really tired looking left leg to try and block the cross, and he gets nowhere near it. So the cross is able to come in. That cross probably shouldn't come in at all, to be honest, at that point, but it does, and then it takes its course. Yeah, maybe it is an element of tiredness, which brings me on to the fixture list. This was their 7th away game in 8 or 6th away game in 7 in their current run. It's been a very, very tough run. Bayern Munich away, Copenhagen away, then only the Cologne game at home, and then since then they've had Frankfurt away in the Cup on the Tuesday, then on to the Friday night away at Augsburg, then Manchester City in the week, then up to Hamburg. It has been a tough run, which is why I think I think a lot of people were maybe forgiving them for the relatively uninspirational performances and 1-0 wins against Cologne, in Augsburg. That was particularly unspectacular. But it was like, okay, as long as that Kovac football is bringing the results in, particularly given the fixture list, I think that's acceptable. Obviously, it's a predictable narrative, isn't it? As soon as that doesn't happen, as soon as you draw 1-1 away and you're the promoted team, then the questions start getting asked. I don't know where I stand on it yet. If the question is, are they in trouble? I think, like Manu sort of said, no, I don't think they are in trouble. I think that's probably taking it too far. But this probably was an issue that was coming. Absolutely. And not just because of the situation Dortmund are in, and the sort of squad that they have this year, also coming off the back of the Club World Cup, I wonder if this is maybe the first example that we're seeing of a team belatedly seeing the effects of that Club World Cup. We actually said that in a weird way, Bayern and Dortmund seem to benefit from coming straight off the back of a competitive pre-season. In that sense, maybe this is an issue where the fixture list is catching up with them. Who knows? But even in the more longer term, in terms of Niko Kovac, we do know this is how he operates. And I'm not going to say that history's repeating itself, and this is exactly what we saw at Bayern, and you can't get the creativity out of the players. He's purely a defensive coach. I'm not going to go so far just yet, but it's an easy jump to make and to start those discussions that are always going to hover around Niko Kovac. I think I would, I don't think they're in trouble at the moment. They're looking all right in the Champions League. Had they got that over the line in Hamburg, they would have been second. I think I'm right in saying, particularly with Red Bull losing. Obviously frustrating from a Dortmund point of view that they've not capitalised on teams around them dropping points. But that's not even just a Niko Kovac problem, is it? That's been a Borussia Dortmund problem for years.
Yeah, it has, and you could probably make an argument that this fixture last year, they probably would have found a way to lose it, especially in a away game. So, I suppose there has been some improvement made there in some regards. But, I mean, Manu, we do have to move on, but before we do, I'll jump back into you about see if you have any final points on Dortmund, because I know you've kind of spoke a lot this season about the teams that have played in the Club World Cup and how there might be a kind of uniform kind of theory about them all, or a pattern beginning to emerge with them. But just to kind of add to what Matt said there about the away games, it's also the fifth consecutive Bundesliga game where they've only scored one goal. And I've got like their XG for and XG against in front of me, and I reckon in the last 5 games, their cumulative XG and XG against, their total would probably be a negative number. And that's not just because they played Bayern. They were negative against Leipzig, they were negative against Augsburg, and as Matt correctly said, they only had one shot on goal against Hamburg. So they had an XG of 1 and Hamburg had an XG of 0.6. So that was very, very narrow as well. So aside from a few chances against Cologne, they've really struggled in the last 5 days. And,
Just on that note with the expected goals as well, I read a stat earlier today that from Borussia Dortmund's 16 competitive games in all competitions this season, they've only had, apparently, an expected goals value of more than 2 on 2 occasions from 16 competitive games.
That makes sense. I've just got... Sorry, man, I'll let you jump in.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that I don't think we're at the point yet where maybe the Club World Cup is the big issue. I think it's the lack of creativity in the attack. And whether the Club World Cup is the factor here, I don't know, because it's not like they're the team that covers the most distance in this league, right? One of them is Bayern Munich. But I think I'm be more concerned about that. Now, of course, you could say sometimes the lack of creativity comes when teams have played a lot of games, right? Bastian Schweinsteiger spoke about that once, how the legs, when they feel heavy, you just go through the motions. You might be still able to cover distance and etc., but the head isn't clear. So maybe that's a thing. But I don't know if that is necessarily true, because you look at the other teams that were in the competition, they're able to still create creative moments, and we can now look back at Borussia Dortmund over the last 4, 5, 6 weeks, where everything works but the goal scoring or the goal scoring creation, right? As you guys pointed out with the XG. So I'm not saying you're wrong, Matt. I just wonder if it's maybe too early to point your finger on that specific issue. Having said that, we're getting an issue about a question about Bayern Munich, and this was the first time this week where we could sort of see the games catching up.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just to kind of wrap it up then, because to try and answer Gatham's question, he says, are Dortmund in trouble? I think we're all saying, not really, maybe. Is it a coaching problem or just personnel?
Not yet, but they have to. They have to get out of this rut. But maybe that'll come with a return to. I think that like 7 of their next 8 games or something ridiculous are at home. Their fixture list is completely topsy turvy. So maybe that'll help them a bit.
Yeah, although they do come home to play Leverkusen. I've just closed the screen so I don't have it in front of me, but it's Leverkusen, someone, and then Hoffenheim. So it's three
They've got
decent sides.
Stuttgart as well. They've got
Stuttgart, Leverkusen, that's what it is. Stuttgart, Leverkusen, and Hoffenheim. So 3 good games. So, and then Gotham asks, how can he improve their defence? I'd say find a way for Girassi not to play for his national team over the international break and then put his feet up for a week. That might do a lot of good. Same with Adeyemi, perhaps. But we digress. We move on. Hopefully that answered some of that question. We want to move on to a game where one of you guys was actually at. Brennan asks, with the derby win and key players set to return, are Gladbach out of the woods? Matt, you were also at this game. You wrote a match report for us. As you put it, Borussia are back in business. Just to kind of answer the question there directly from Brennan, are Gladbach out of the woods?
Making a few positive steps in the right direction to get out of the woods.
They found the compass.
They found the path. Yeah, they found the compass.
They found the path and the compass.
I loving all the metaphors around this Borussia Mönchengladbach situation. The user who asked the question has used the out of the woods metaphor, which is good. You've gone for a compass. I sort of stole.
I'm saying you need a compass to get out of the woods. I'm not making a new metaphor here.
I stole the metaphor that was used by a colleague from Kicker over in Germany, and they said that what was it? They said Gladbach had found the light switch in the cellar and turned the light on, and they found the stairs. So that's why I said that the win against Cologne was maybe the first step up the first stair to get out of the cellar. So yeah, that's all the metaphors we have. I think they are looking okay, and since I wrote that, all the teams around them have also lost. Today, Augsburg, Mainz and St. Pauli all lost. Yesterday, obviously, Wolfsburg and Heidenheim also lost, which has left Borussia Mönchengladbach in the actually pretty ridiculous position of now being 12th. Which is absolutely bizarre when you consider that up until less than 2 weeks ago, they hadn't won a game since March. And yeah, I think it was 15 Bundesliga games going back to last season. And obviously they were in complete chaos. Gerardo Seoane sacked 2 weeks later after that ridiculous 6-4 against Eintracht Frankfurt. The sporting director, Roland Firkus, also resigned. So it's been a complete restart. They've brought in Eugen Polanski, bit of a club legend in a sense. Definitely very popular with the fan. They brought him in on an interim basis, and it even took him 5 games to get a positive result.
Yeah.
But now suddenly we're sat here in a situation going to the international break where Borussia Mönchengladbach have won 3 games in a row, if we include the cup win against Karlsruhe, and then the 4-0 win away at St. Pauli, which was impressive. And the most impressive was his 3-1 win against Cologne. I wrote in a piece, I think one of my newsletters actually a few weeks ago, that Gladbach would have been looking up at this derby with some trepidation, given the start to the season that Cologne had. And I think Cologne did travel to Mönchengladbach as just about as favourites. But Gladbach were absolutely the better team on the day, very much deserved it. And I think, basically, Eugen Polanski he's getting the best, finally, out of a selection of players who I think, on paper, and purely statistically and theoretically, are better in their positions than what Cologne currently have to offer. It's just that Lukas Kwasniok has been doing such a surprisingly good job at the start of the season in building a good team out of Cologne, whereas the opposite's been true of Gladbach. On Saturday, however, you saw that if you take the comparison on the 2 wings, for example, of Frank Honorat for Gladbach on their right wing, compared to Saïd El-Mallah, who we've praised a lot for Cologne on their left wing, the difference was marked. It really was, and obviously the big age difference. Honorat is an experienced professional, spent years and years and years in France. El-Mallah is a kid. But whereas Saïd El-Mallah was dragged off at half time because, quote, Lukas Kwasniok, he wasn't very good. he was completely right. I like that directness and truthfulness from a coach. I think Frank Honorat was great, and he's the perfect foil to play in between a player like in behind a player like Haris Tabakovic up front, who's been the one glimmer of light for Gladbach all season. He's now scored in their last 3 games. I think the Gladbach's third goal was a case in point. Honorat getting away down the right.
I've got the figures in front of you for a minute if you want. He's played 5 games for Gladbach this season since joining on loan, and he's got 5 goals and 2 assists.
Yeah, which outstanding.
And he's quite an interesting figure because I remember him scoring a buckload of goals in this first Bundesliga for Hertha. He ends up at Hoffenheim where he does nothing, 3 goals in 22 games. Before that, he was actually doing quite well in Austria. He scored a lot of goals for Austria Vienna and in the Zweite Liga in Austria as well. Just buckle of goals. So he's kind of been this kind of traveling salesman, but like I can't remember what the expression I'm thinking of. A journeyman. That's right. Yeah. Going to start quoting Frank Miller, the death of a salesman. But he seems to have found
that third goal.
He's found a club that works, hasn't he? I mean, you've got Kleindienst here 2.0.
Well, I mean, he was brought in effectively as a replacement for Tim Kleindienst when he got injured. Kleindienst's contract has actually been extended, so they are counting on him coming back and taking up a role again. But Tabakovic has proven to be much more than just a temporary, maybe temporary because on loan, but more than just a replacement. He's become the main man. One extra little bit of praise for Frank Honorat as well, who withstood the temptation to chip Cologne's goalkeeper Marvin Schweber when he broke away down the right, and Schweber was backtracking towards the edge of his box, and the chip was on, and the Nordkurve behind the goal is screaming like, sheesh, shoot. And even I'm thinking, go for the chip, but he's kept his calm. He's played a great ball into Tabakovic, which is obviously the correct decision, and they've made it 3-0. Really deserved win. Cologne not really at the races, although I think both managers were also pretty upset at the VAR. Seems to have united everyone.
Would you want to go into that a bit more, Matt, for anyone who maybe missed a game, and then maybe touch on Cologne, who have had, as you said, a kind of really interesting start to the season, but now just one win in the last 4 games. Do you think this is a bit of a wobble? They've got Frankfurt after the international break. What have you made of them so far? Do you think, where they are in their position in the table is, well, I don't want to say genuine, but, is it realistic for where they maybe should be compared to like the strength of the squad, or have they just kind of taken advantage of a lot of teams having really slow starts this season?
Someone's asking the questions, haven't they? Who's sort of the biggest pretender of the season so far? And my answer to that would be Cologne. Started really well. Perhaps there's 2 sides to it. I think Lucas Kwasniok has gelled a really, really good team together. They're really, really variable. They're a bit unpredictable. They've got some good flexibility in the team. The likes of Jakub Kaminski and Mahler and Marcus Bülter up front, they have been impressive. Even Florian Kainz is enjoying a little bit of a revival. He was really good against Hamburg last week. On the other hand, they have had some relatively favourable fixtures. Obviously, Mainz, it's turned out, they had them on the first day, and Mainz have turned out to be a very, very problematic side this year. They beat Freiburg, who've also been a bit hot and cold. They maybe had a little bit of fortune against Hamburg, with Hamburg having 2 players sent off. They were good away in the first half away at Dortmund, but eventually were shown sort of where their limits were. But I think ultimately they probably have surprised everyone. That's just how well they started, and this is where they've ended up now with a couple of with this derby defeat. It probably sort of brings them back into a part of the table which is a bit more realistic. And given everything, I think you forget when they were sort of hovering around 4th, 5th, 6th that they are a promoted team. With a lot of new players and a new coach, so there will be teething problems there. I think they'll be okay. I don't expect them to be in a relegation battle. lies mainly because, as we mentioned, a lot of the other teams having issues. Teams whose defeats Gladbach have profited this weekend. But yeah, I think they'll be okay. But they probably, now where they are going into this break, probably reflects better where they are. As for the VAR, yeah, there were some controversial decisions this weekend. I think there were three pens in this game. And I think both managers were actually in agreement that the first pen and the third pen, the first one for Gladbach and one for Cologne, that neither of them were penalties in the opinion of both Eugen Polanski and Lukas Kwasniok. I think the middle one, so Gladbach's second penalty was a handball from Lund, the Cologne defender. I think that is a clear handball. I think that was fair enough. But no, the other two are, well, one is a slight looks like a slight barge in the box, but from Lund. But in my opinion, also, it's absolutely not intentional, and it looks so much worse when you slow it down on VAR. And the same is true, but even more extreme for the penalty that Cologne were awarded late on, when there's apparently a slight push on Ragnar Ache in the box, which also for me is not a pen, but probably in fairness, VAR didn't double check that one, or at least didn't recall it. And yeah, it was interesting to hear in the press conference afterwards, both managers agreeing with each other and saying that they're not fans of it, and they think it should be limited purely to black and white decisions, so offsides, although we can discuss that in relation to Bayern in a second, can't we? Offsides, goal line technology. Yeah, situations where there is a yes, no, 50-50, black, white, one or the other decision, not situations where it's reliant purely on subjectivity. Is that an intentional push in the box? Is that enough to send him to ground? I think that's the argument being made by Kwasniok and Polanski. It's one that I personally agree with. So yeah, there was that everyone in the Rhineland agrees on this weekend, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, Matt broke down extensively that game and how Gladbach won it without actually referencing the fact that since I wrote a newsletter saying Gladbach will get relegated, they've now become world beaters. So I think if anyone deserves credit for Gladbach's turnaround, it's this guy right here. Classic kind of commentator's curse. But
can I point out that you did something similar for Stuttgart a few years ago, and it turned out pretty good for them as well?
Yeah, I wrote a newsletter saying what's the point of Stuttgart, and they've since become probably the most improved team in German football. Yeah, I think I actually gave Sebastian Hoeneß his first break as a manager off the back of that newsletter. So trust me, there's a few clubs I want to write that piece about this season. So if there's any directors of football or CEOs of troubled Bundesliga clubs needing me to kind of, what's the opposite of curse? Bless their clubs, I suppose, with scathing articles. Just send me a text and I'll pass on my bank details. Manu, let's jump into the Bayern game. I'm not, because before we do, I don't actually think you got a chance to watch this game, did you? But if you did, by all means, feel free to add something if you want about Gladbach.
No, I really didn't watch this game. I heard it was phenomenal. I saw the criticism about the VAR, and I mean, we had a moment and a half in the Bayern game as well that we need to touch on. But I think outside Matt, I don't really have anything to add to what you said. It's very rare that I miss games on the match day, but of course when I travel and I'm on a bus, etc., it happens. But so yeah, happy to move on to the Bayern game.
I was glad that the game finally picked up. I think I messaged in our little group that the first half was actually a bit unspectacular until this in the first half injury time where Gladbach obviously get the pen, then Marvin Schweber saves it from Tabakovic. We've praised Tabakovic, but don't forget they also missed a pen in this game, although it was a very, very good save from Marvin Schweber, must be said. And then, that's just before half time, so you're thinking, okay, it'll be 0-0 at half time, and in that moment, a Cologne Ultra in the away end sets off a flare in celebration at the penalty save, and I'm thinking, you might have gone a little bit too early with that one, mate, because there's still a good minute to play here, and you've not cleared, and Gladbach have got a corner, and you've not cleared the corner. And Philip Sander has banged it in the back of the net while the flare is still going off. So I don't know what you do in that situation as an ultra. What do? You just have to stand there and wait until it runs out? Yeah, it's basically an awkward situation for everyone.
I'm assuming everyone beside him in the tribune just kind of stepped away, and it was just this kind of circle around him, like empty space.
Can you imagine being the poor idiot who did this, and just the moment of shame where everyone is like the ultras, not ultras say you're an idiot for lighting a flare, but they will say you're an idiot for timing it badly.
Just wait 30 seconds, wait till half time. Oh, well.
Yeah, considering all this kind of superstitious stuff that football fans live by, and not to jinx something or curse something, is that's definitely right up there for sure. But let's respectfully move on from Gladbach and wish them well, and Cologne well as well, and touch upon this Bayern games. We are now 35 minutes into the pod and we haven't even touched on this game. Manu, you're obviously there. I must admit, when you said you were going out for this game, flying across the world as you do, I did think it's a bit of a dead rubber. Bayern are going to win this one 5-0. There won't be a huge amount to take away from it, but as luck would have it, or chance would have, or whatever, or shows how much I know, Union Berlin put up a fantastic fight. I saw Baumgart after the game saying about how, and this is actually something that maybe touched on what we talked about in recent weeks, about how no one really puts up a fight against Bayern, it seems, in the Bundesliga, and then obviously they go to Copenhagen and, Union Berlin play really well. Some question marks, Manu. I think a lot of people are questioning why Kompany, after such a grueling midweek game against PSG, if I'm not mistaken, went with the exact same lineup, and it felt like it showed. And our main question about Bayern was from, I'm going to call her Frau Schallenberger because she hasn't given her first name. It's Frau D. Schallenberger. I know she's a long-time subscriber, and I know she chats us on social media, but I'm really sorry. I forgot. I cannot remember what your first name is. It starts with D. I want to say Dora. I don't know. I'm really sorry. But she says, of Bayern's first 11, who do you think looked the most tired and needs rest more? Will he dare to rest any players against Freiburg? What about Odyssey, Leonard Carl, Kimmich, Upa? Bayern, any injuries during international break? Who would you line up for Bayern on the next match day? Which is an interesting question, man. And like I was saying to the subscribers during the game, it's it's one thing to not rest the team, but it's another thing entirely to not do it the week after he basically played the B team against Leverkusen and they won comfortably. So I don't know why he couldn't have just done that again against, on paper, an Union Berlin side who obviously don't have the same talent as Leverkusen. But yeah, a very odd match. Jump in, try your best to answer that question, and just let us know how the game went.
Let me answer the question right on top before I go into a little bit of match details. I thought it was Michael Olise who looked the most tired. He's played a lot of football. The creativity has been lacking, not just in this match, for a few games now. And you can tell that he's been playing a lot. And I thought in this game, the touches were off, the passes were off, just that half second that can make a difference. I thought he showed it the most. There's other players in this team that also showed signs of being a little tired, but with him it was for some reason really noticeable. Upamecano had a very tough time against Ilyas Anza, who's a phenomenal player, Union Berlin striker, right? 24-year-old striker, Germany striker. And I thought he put, with the amount of distance covered, put a lot of pressure on that back line, and Upa and Konrad Leiner as well had their moments where they just seemed outpaced and outmuscled. I mean, honestly, Union Berlin put in a shift. This Bayern team, with a man down, outran PSG by 3 kilometers midweek. They led the league ahead of the last match day in distance covered, intensive runs and sprints. Have since been surpassed by Hoffenheim. They're still second and third respectively in those categories. which is rare for a top team in German in the top 5 leagues. In fact, it almost never happens, right? Usually it's relegation candidates that outrun the top teams, because the top teams let the ball circulate, they have possession, they don't need to run and cover distance as much. That's been one of Kompany's big things this year, the amount of the mileage covered. I think it's what makes his possession football work so deadly and effectively, that players go the extra mile. But I think it's showing, and Union Berlin actually was the first team, I think, this season that, at least in the Bundesliga, that completely outran them. They outran them by 6 kilometers. They put in a real shift, and they managed to put Bayern Munich on the pressure in situations that I don't think have seen yet this year. They did this by constantly running at them, constantly challenging the ball leader, constantly trying to be a step ahead. And it worked. It really did. I felt a little unfortunate, because we on these media visits we all put in a bet before the match on the score, and I was like, screw it, I'm just gonna tip a 2-1 win for Union Berlin. And I had it right until the very last second when Harry Kane popped up and scored the equalizer.
Stefan, that is heartbreaking, Manu. That is heartbreaking stuff.
That's heartbreaking. I know. I would have won something too. So that kind of sucks. And that would have been amazing to get right, because it seemed like the most unlikely thing, because everyone else put in like 3-0 for Bayern, 4-0 for Bayern, or like Stefan 5-0, right? Like everyone else was like, I'm not gonna tip that. I'm just gonna tip 2-1 Union Berlin, because like, that's like, it was like a Hail Mary to stay with the American football theme, right? But yeah, then I almost had it. Dan Whiten had 1-1 tipped, so he ended up winning by default. But yeah, so, but I actually thought the way that they played was really special, and maybe also highlighted the way that you have to play against this Bayern Munich team. This Bayern Munich team has been effective and really hard to play against, because they put in a shift. They do what other top teams in Europe are not always willing to do. Even when they're man down, they work extremely hard. And then, of course, on top of that, they have one of the most talented, maybe the most talented starting 11 European football as well, right? So they combine things that you usually see from a top side, high possession numbers, high chance creation, but they also add elements that you don't see from a top side. And we mentioned it is something that makes them stand out, but it's also something that in a year where they also played in the Club World Cup could maybe sooner or later catch up to them. And I wonder if in this game we've seen the first cracks of that, but also need to point out that there was still enough energy in this team. And Tom Bischoff plays a phenomenal cross to make it to Harry Kane, who then scores the only way Harry Kane can score. And then they have their other moments as well, like that Luis Diaz goal. Sepp Stafford-Blur from The Athletic was on this trip, and he had his stats team at the Athletic ran the stats on it. It's the goal scored from the tightest ankle this season across the top 5 leagues. A phenomenal goal, the way he builds up in the Stanisic, the 1-2, and then wins the ball, and Haber just steps a moment off, and then he scores from pretty much the byline. It's a phenomenal goal. So these are the tiny moments that even when things are not going so well, when they're tired, etc., they still have the individual quality to get at least a point. But I think Union Berlin showed that maybe, just maybe, if you do outwork them in a season where they are working so very hard, that is a recipe where you can hurt them, because it was quite simple what Union Berlin did. And then Steffen Baumgart is maybe the perfect coach for it. He has his team, and the cup, like, the alte Försterei gets loud and angry and like has that power and the energy, right? And especially when the team is going well like they did, it develops those special moments, and I think it gives every player that extra step. But Steffen Baumgart did really well setting the team up that way as well. And I thought it was heartbreaking. And I think we also, we had that one VAR moment where they drew a line to determine that Upamecano had played Doki maybe it was Anza, just off. But when you look at where the line falls, and it's like literally the outer millimeter of a boot, I am for VAR and I'm for detecting clear and obvious errors, but this doesn't fall into the clear and obvious error situation for me. Plus, we're drawing lines here. Like, when did we draw the line? And it seemed like an injustice that goal was chalked off. And when that goal was chalked off, the 1-0 taken away from Union Berlin, I thought, okay, this is how it usually goes against Bayern Munich. You have that moment, that aha moment. You think you're like back in you now ahead of the game. Maybe you can now hurt them. Most teams then, when they get that goal taken away from them, fall apart. But Union Berlin just carried on and then actually managed to score the 2 goals, right? And I thought that was very brilliant, although, the VAR, I think, in that case was an injustice.
Yeah. Dan, I've got some stats for you, which I think are quite interesting off the back of this game. So this was Bayern's 10th away game of the season. And in those 10 games, they've conceded 11 goals. On 3 occasions, they've conceded more than 2 goals, more than 1 goal, and on just 2 occasions, they've kept a clean sheet. You flip that to their away games, where they've played 7 games, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 7 home games so far, and they've only conceded a goal on 2 occasions. Definitely seems to be, and this is maybe the perfect game to discuss this, where there definitely seems to be a kind of, I don't want to say like a kind of black and white or Jekyll and Hyde thing going on here, because they're still winning games. It's not as drastic as that, but either through the way that Kompany's teams attack sides away from home or other teams attack them, they're definitely conceding way more goals on the road. And on this occasion, it caused them problems, but it has caused them problems in the past. We can think of the cup game against Wien. There's other examples where Dortmund, for example. The Dortmund game was Augsburg. Sorry, the Dortmund game was at the Allianz Arena, of course. But there's plenty of examples where you can maybe even use the PSG game midweek, I suppose, if you want, where we rightfully are saying Bayern are this kind of fantastic team. They're, potential contenders for Champions League. They're, especially after Dortmund and Leipzig this weekend, are still sleepwalking towards the league title this year, or cakewalking, whatever expression you want to use. But it feels like when they're on the road, Matt, they do seem a bit more clumsy in front of their own goal.
Yeah, I think particularly from set pieces. If there is any sort of little problematic pattern emerging with Bayern Munich in recent weeks, it might be that. I think we touched on it regarding the cup game away at Cologne, when obviously before Cologne score, they have 1 or 2 other, I think Johansson and Acher have good headers from set pieces, which Bayern don't get anywhere near clearing. So when they went ahead, it was a goal that was definitely coming, and then we've seen it again yesterday in Berlin. Not just the disallowed goal. I mean, that's obviously an issue regardless of the fact of whether he's offside or whether he's not. That's a different discussion. But he's free in the box, and he's got to the ball and nodded it in. The actual goal that Union scored, which does stand, in Bayern's defence, it's a completely mishit corner. It's a bit of a bizarre goal. I don't think that's off the training pitch. I don't think he's meant to lay the corner back the way he does. Is it Harbour who's taken the corner? Can't remember. He's mishit it, and the Union lad has put it in. Obviously it's a mistake from Neuer. That happens. But again, it's another set piece which Bayern haven't reacted to, haven't defended properly, and even for Union's second goal, and this occurs to me as well before when you asked Bayern players who are potentially tired. I thought that was a very, very tired attempt at a clearance from Harry Kane.
For sure.
And quite uncharacteristic from him as well. He's nodded it straight down into the striker's path. So yeah, few things coming together there. Set piece defending, perhaps some tightness coming in as well. Concentration, reaction times to, like I said, that rather fluky Union Berlin corner. Yeah, I do wonder if there is some work to be done there. I heard as well. I was reading as well that apparently the halftime team talk in Cologne was done by the set piece coach, Aaron Danks, I think his name is. And yeah, given the problems that they'd had in the first half in Cologne, he addressed the team. Yeah, maybe he'll have to do that again, given the issues that they had in Köpenick.
even the goal that Neuer concedes, right, the one that slips through his arm, like the shot gets deflected 2 or 3 times, he has to go down, but even like that, like that is such a lazy one from him to concede, like, and I mean, like, not lazy in terms of he didn't care, but like he just doesn't seem to have the reaction necessary in that moment to go down, and like he's played a lot of games, including the Club World Cup now, right? And that is maybe a moment where you like realize, oh yeah, he is a 39-year-old who plays every week, and that is the sort of mistake that happens to you when you're tired as a goalkeeper. So like even
Yeah,
that kind of plays a big factor, right?
Point.
Like, and because I looked at it again, and it looks horrible, but like also the way it comes in, and he just like is off, and then he comes down, and like you guys know my opinion. If the goalkeeper can touch the ball, he can stop it. But like still, like it is also just one of those things where like maybe you're just. Neuer is a very proactive goalkeeper. The game against PSG was very difficult. That is also maybe one where you think like maybe this is a game you give Urbik, right? And like say like, look, you're playing a lot of games. Maybe this is one where we put Urbik in goal and give him some minutes. I don't know. I think everyone is a little bit. Hindsight is always 2020, and like Kompany didn't seem to be too fussed about it because like he realized that okay, well this was going to be difficult and things like that happen, but it is maybe one where you kind of think like, yeah, maybe a little bit more rotation would have helped, and maybe rotation even in goal would have helped.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, that kind of touched on what the question was, like, who do you think should be getting some game time going forward if Bayern are beginning to look a little jaded? It's worth noting as well that while PSG's goal didn't come from a set piece, they came very close with at least 1 or 2 corners as well, just before they did get their goal. But yeah, in terms of Manu, who should, just kind of before we wrap up the Bayern game, just kind of answer the question directly. You mean, you touched on Olise. That's an interesting problem for Bayern to have because he has been their best player this season. I know Diaz has kind of stepped up in the last kind of couple of weeks and he scored a tremendous goal in this game. But he obviously let Bayern down a fair amount in the PSG match for getting sent off. And, you know, if I was Bayern, my main concern, aside from what we just talked about there in terms of how kind of open they are from set pieces and how open they are defensively away from home, Olise is their playmaker. He's the guy who makes that team tick. He's the guy who just kind of like everything goes through him. And I know if he's out of his game, maybe someone like Kimmich can come in, but they don't really have a player in that team. Aside maybe, you know, Leonard Carl, maybe it's a perfect opportunity for someone like Leonard Carl to kind of step in off that right-hand side. Mm-hmm. But Manu, it's going into the international break, I suppose it's a good time, but at the same time, I'd imagine that Olise will be playing for France, I would imagine. I think he has been. I know he's in under 21s last year, but I think he has been playing for the national team or the senior team. That would be my concern as a Bayern fan, like going forward, because if Olise starts to look really jaded, and you know we've seen it with Musiala in recent seasons, where when he kind of starts to look like he's quite heavy-legged, Bayern begin to kind of start to stumble a wee bit, and you know we could maybe see that with Olise as well.
Well, and like creative players like that need the freedom of having light legs, right? The moment they get a little bit more tired and you labor through the process, you don't have the clarity in your head to make those creative decisions. I mean, a good example is Tom Bischoff. He comes on and he does play a fantastic cross. That leads to the equalizer, right? Leonard Carl came on at right back. Yeah, and I mean, like that is maybe another point of contention. Like maybe you give him some chances to play as a number 10 or number 8, right? And
maybe play the centre mid who can play right back.
Sure, like a certain Joshua Kimmich.
Yeah.
These are good points. And Leonard Carl comes on. He provides more spark and more creativity. Absolutely. And I was as surprised as everyone else that he didn't rotate the team, especially because this midweek fixture was so difficult, right? Again, with a man down, they outran one of the best teams in Europe. That's incredible. And we're not talking like per player, like the overall team. And so those are the things that are to watch. But I think Kompany too, he's a guy that very quickly understands the data points that he receives from a match are very quickly programmed, and he understands and learns them very quickly. And I think he will adjust very fast. And we have to remember too, and this is going to be fascinating, in less than a month, those two teams meet again in the German Cup, right? And I'm really curious to see how that's going to turn out.
Yeah. I mean, I think before we kind of wrap up here, because we are now approaching an hour, and I do think we kind of have to move on from the Bayern game. Unless, Matt, you've got any final points, or are you happy to move along?
No, I'm happy with that. I just think it's in many ways pretty predictable the way this has gone this week. I think given all the absolutely justifiable praise that they got in the week, absolutely incredible performance in Paris, to then not change the team at all, was a little bit baffling, particularly at such a tough place to go as Union Berlin. The substitutions did make a difference from what I saw of the game. I thought Leonard Karl and Tom Bischoff were really, really good additions, particularly because I thought, Joshua Kimmich in Paris looked and sounded completely knackered, and he seemed tired in Berlin as well. Another one who was suggested was potentially a bit tired, along with Elise. The one positive line in on that is that Kompany rarely made mistakes in his time Bayern so far. And as Manu said, he'll recognise it if it is a mistake that he's made. He'll recognise it and it'll be corrected. But it's not going to be it's not going to be 2 weeks off for them. It's not like the international break is a break for them.
Yeah, for sure. Right, we've got 3 more questions, guys, that I want to try and wrap up in the next 5 minutes. So I think we should do like a kind of quick fire round. we all answer one each. I'll come to you first, Matt. Matt, do you want Frankfurt or Hoffenheim?
Go on, I'll take Frankfurt.
All right, so Nick asks, pleased with the Frankfurt result today, but frustrated with the lack of goals. Why is it now proving so difficult to score?
I mean, obviously, the obvious answers are losing Mamouche and Ekitike are never going to be easy issues to replace.
Yeah.
And I think in many ways also seeing I think Dino Topmüller often finds himself in a similar situation to Niko Kovac. I think came in, did a really, really good job of stabilising Frankfurt. Good finish to last season, good start to this season. I think people in the first few match days were even talking about them as being the main challengers to Bayern Munich this season. That's absolutely not materialised. I think that's safe to say. And I think issues of tiredness might also play a role as well. As we see with so many Bundesliga squads, if generally speaking, if they're not Bayern or Dortmund, they do struggle to fight on multiple fronts when they're in Europe. And Frankfurt also, particularly this week, I know it makes it all the more impressive this week that they've come back off a decent 0-0 draw away at Napoli in the week and won today. Maybe that's the start of a little upturn, but lots of changes, lots of squad changes in Frankfurt, which is the nature of the beast. Like any club that's not Bayern or Dortmund, they bring good players through, qualify for Europe. These players get on the biggest stage, they sell them for big money, and then it's can you replace them? And they've lost 2 big names. So, I was happy to see them win today, though. I think that was important.
Yeah. I would say to Nick, we did touch on Frankfurt and kind of switched to more defensive football on the second bonus show last week after the 0-0 draw with Napoli, so definitely pick up on that. Manu touched on that. I'll jump in with a question on Mainz, Manu, and I'll let you finish up with Hoffenheim. Landon asks, are Mainz in trouble? Terrible form across all competitions. Might be time for a coaching change. I wouldn't be surprised by a coaching change at all, but all I would say is that looking at their stats and their performances, they're not defending nearly as well, but they're also not scoring nearly as many goals. They're obviously missing Burkhardt, who obviously started up front for Frankfurt, who admittedly hasn't been scoring a huge amount of goals either. But I think the main issue is Benedikt Hollerbach and William Bofing just not really hitting the ground running just yet. I think both of them have had pretty interesting issues so far. Hollerbach obviously joined the club as I think it might have been a record signing potentially. I thought it was a really smart signing, but he only lasted 15 minutes in their first game. then picked up an injury for 4 games, and he's only just kind of getting back to form. Only lasted 70 minutes against Frankfurt on Sunday. And then Bovin has had an even more bizarre start to the season. He was on the bench for 4 or 5 games, and then he was out of the squad entirely. I think it was a fitness issue. And he was on the bench in this game, but wasn't used on Sunday. And I think he said himself that he's still trying to get up to speed with kind of moving up from the Austrian Bundesliga to the German Bundesliga. But I mean, he was a really interesting player for Sturm Graz, actually. So, and I know he was really highly touted at Copenhagen as well when he came through the under-19. So they've got 2 centre forwards there who could potentially replace Burkhardt, but both of them have really struggled for game time. So I think if they can, both of them kind of get in and start playing some games and start scoring some goals, Mainz might look back to their old self. But I think they were always going to really struggle, to be perfectly honest with you. In terms of that squad and the clubs coming up, they were always going to be the ones that were perhaps squeezed the most. But as we saw with Gladbach recently, and perhaps Hoffenheim, things can change very quickly after 2 or 3 results. Which, Manu, brings me on to our last question. You can wrap up the show. Andrew says, with a win over Leipzig, are Hoffenheim a real threat for the Champions League places? Or is this just a lucky run of form? I think Andrew might be getting a bit optimistic here, going from relegation fodder to Champions Leagues in one season.
No, they're not a candidate for the Champions League. I'm sorry to disappoint. I think this was a bit of a lucky run for them. I kept an eye on the game against Leipzig. It's a game where they maybe a bit fortunate to win, especially this high. And I think there's also a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that are very problematic and have the potential to really derail all of this. I think, we're going to probably touch on that very soon in a special show. But yeah, don't get out the champagne for Champions League quite yet. I think that is extremely premature. And yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. And I think guys could probably wrap it up from there, eh?
I think so, yeah. So that was kind of a bumper episode. But yeah, I mean, we'll be back obviously next week with the main show in some form. In fact, I'm not sure if we will actually. We usually take the international break off, don't we? We'll see what happens. But we will be doing the bonus shows as always. Like I said at the start of the show, we'll probably do a deep dive on Wolfsburg now that they've moved on to their head coach. And that kind of peculiar sporting situation is happening there with the kind of Danish invasion of Lower Saxony. But we'll see how that one's going. And then we'll find something else to talk about for the second show. It might be Hoffenheim, it might be Germany, who knows. Yeah, Manu, I think we'll just wrap that up. Thank Matt for joining. Thank you for joining as well before your flight home. And I'll let you do the famous words to wrap things up.
I'm leaving Berlin. It's 11 o'clock at night. I'm leaving my hotel in 4 hours. So thoughts and prayers to me. But yeah, that's that. All right, guys. I see you and talk to all of you probably next week at some point. Auf Wiedersehen.